I used to believe my life was simple. Work hard. Stay invisible. That was my routine, until the day her assistant called. The CEO's wife wanted to see me. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Her office didn't feel like an office. It felt like a private world. She was elegant, controlled, untouchable. I need someone I can trust. Someone who won't talk. My marriage is a partnership on paper. I'm not asking for love. I want companionship. On my terms. I walked out of that office unchanged on the outside, but something had already fractured inside me. That night, I stared at the ceiling longer than I slept. I wasn't thinking about saying yes. I was thinking about what would happen if I didn't.
For 3 days, the message stayed on red. A quiet threat. I was afraid of how quickly I might stop being myself. On the 4th day, a polite invitation. The elevator ride felt familiar, which frightened me more. In her office, she let the silence do its work. You didn't respond, she observed. I don't need desperation. I need control. This arrangement only works if it stays clean. No emotions. No mistakes. If you walk away, she said, your life stays the same. I knew that was only half true. I wasn't tempted by her, but by what she represented. That night, another message. Silence is also an answer. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, I typed back. I understand the terms. No reply came, but I knew I had crossed the first boundary. Not with my body, but with my honesty.
After that message, nothing happened, but everything had. Days felt heavier. I wasn't waiting for a message anymore. I was waiting for permission to stop pretending. She found me in the cafeteria. You look tired, she said. No greeting, just a quiet statement. My heart was beating too fast for nothing. That evening, a message came. Tomorrow, my office. After hours. In her office, she asked why I was there. I don't want to feel invisible anymore. I confessed. She stepped close, adjusted my collar, and said, that was the line. I understood then. The first line isn't crossed with a touch. It's crossed the moment you stop wanting to leave.
After that night, something subtle but dangerous settled into my routine. Expectation. Not hope, not excitement. Expectation is quieter than both, and far more controlling. She didn't contact me again for several days. And this time, the silence didn't feel strategic. It felt deliberate, like a test I hadn't been told I was taking. At work, I noticed how carefully I behaved now. Every email reread twice, every sentence measured, every reaction muted. It wasn't fear of getting caught. I wasn't doing anything that could be exposed. Not yet. It was fear of being seen. Once you realize someone is watching your choices, even indirectly, you start editing yourself. And that's how secrecy begins. Not with lies, but with curation. We crossed paths more often after that. Never intentionally, never directly. An elevator ride where she stood behind me. Close enough that I could sense her presence without seeing her. A meeting where she entered late and sat silently. Her eyes passing over me for half a second longer than they needed to. Nothing obvious. Everything intentional. The first real shift happened the day she stopped initiating. No messages. No summons. No signals. I told myself it was relief, that I was grateful for the distance. But the truth was uglier. I missed the awareness, and missing it meant I had already let something into my head that didn't belong there. The moment came unexpectedly, during a routine meeting. I wasn't even supposed to attend. Halfway through, my name was mentioned casually. Have him stay, she said. That was all. The room didn't react. No one noticed anything unusual. But I did. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't need to. The meeting ended. People filtered out. I remained seated, pretending to review notes. She stood, gathered her tablet, and paused near the door. Walk with me, she said. Again, not a request. The hallway outside was empty. Late afternoon light slanted through the glass walls, casting long shadows across the floor. This isn't supposed to feel complicated, she said as we walked. It doesn't, I replied automatically. She stopped, turned, looked directly at me this time. That, she said calmly, was a lie. And I don't tolerate lies. The words weren't sharp, but they cut deeper than anger ever could. I'm trying to understand what this is, I said quietly. She studied my face, then nodded once. Good, she said. Because understanding is the last thing people reach before they lose control. She resumed walking. I followed. This only works, she continued, if you remember one thing. What? I asked. She stopped at her office door. That you are not here because I asked you to be, she said. You're here because you chose to be. She opened the door and stepped inside, but didn't invite me in. That was the message. That evening, I realized how carefully she was reshaping the dynamic. She wasn't pulling me closer. She was removing the exits. I began noticing how often my thoughts drifted back to her words. How her calm authority had become a reference point in my decisions. Even outside work, I was still living my life, still functioning, still in control. But now there was a quiet presence in my mind, measuring, evaluating, observing. Not her voice, my own. And it sounded different than it used to. The most unsettling part wasn't temptation. It was alignment. I found myself thinking the way she thought. Choosing silence where I once would have explained. Withholding where I once would have given freely. Power doesn't always arrive as dominance. Sometimes it arrives as clarity. The night ended the same way many nights had lately, with me alone, staring at my phone, realizing I no longer needed a message to feel connected to the situation. Because the truth had settled in fully now. Secrecy wasn't something I was maintaining anymore. It was something I was becoming fluent in, and fluency, once learned, is very hard to forget. By the time I noticed the change, it had already become normal. That was the most dangerous part. Nothing dramatic happened after that hallway moment. No secret meetings, no late-night messages, no sudden escalation. On the surface, everything returned to routine. But inside me, something had quietly shifted its weight. I no longer waited for her to reach out. I waited for signs. A pause in her step when she passed my desk. A glance held half a second longer during meetings. A decision made in a way that mirrored something I had once said. These were nothing on their own. Any rational person would have dismissed them as coincidence. I didn't, because silence had stopped feeling empty. It felt intentional. And intention, when unspoken, invites imagination to fill the gaps. I caught myself adjusting my schedule around moments she might appear. Staying late, not because of deadlines, but because part of me believed she noticed who stayed. I told myself it was ambition. That lie lasted a while. What I didn't admit, what I couldn't admit, was that my sense of validation had quietly relocated. It no longer came from results or recognition. It came from alignment, from feeling in sync with someone who never asked me to be. The first crack in my certainty came during a conversation with a colleague. A simple question about a decision I'd made earlier in the week. "Why'd you choose that approach?" he asked casually. I opened my mouth to explain, and froze, because the answer that came to mind wasn't mine. It was hers. Not something she'd said aloud, but something I knew she would have approved of. That realization unsettled me more than anything else had so far. I wasn't reacting to her actions anymore. I was anticipating her perspective. That night, I didn't sleep well. Not because I felt guilty, but because I felt aware. Awareness is uncomfortable when you're not ready to change. Days passed, then weeks. We spoke once briefly, during a scheduled discussion. Professional, neutral, polished. And yet the space between us felt denser than before. She asked a question about a report I'd submitted. "You didn't have to rewrite this section," she said calmly. "I thought it needed clarity," I replied. She nodded. It did. That was all. But the approval landed heavier than praise ever should. On the way home, I asked myself something I had been avoiding. If she disappeared tomorrow, would I feel relief? The answer came too quickly. No, I would feel unmoored. That frightened me. I tried to regain distance after that. Forced myself to disengage mentally. Focused on routines. Reminded myself of who I was before all this started. But control doesn't return on command. It returns only when you stop negotiating with the part of you that wants to stay. And I wasn't ready to stop, because somewhere along the way I had confused calm influence with stability. I mistook her restraint for safety. And the more she said nothing, the more I filled in meaning. That's when I understood the truth I didn't want to face. The line hadn't moved. Silence wasn't restraint anymore. It was permission I had given myself. And once permission is internal, it no longer needs to be granted. I went to bed that night knowing something had been lost. Not trust, not boundaries, not even innocence. What I lost was distance. And distance, once gone, is the hardest thing to reclaim. The realization didn't arrive suddenly. It seeped in, like water finding cracks in a wall you believed was solid. I noticed it one morning when my routine broke for no clear reason. Same alarm, same commute, same office entrance. But something inside me resisted the repetition. Not boredom, resistance. I paused at my desk longer than usual before sitting down, as if delaying the start of something I didn't want to acknowledge. That's when I understood. I was no longer reacting to circumstances. I was bracing for outcomes. She hadn't spoken to me in days. No messages, no passing comments, no deliberate silence either, just absence. And yet her presence felt heavier than ever. That contradiction should have scared me. Instead, it felt stabilizing. That's when I knew something was wrong. Later that day, an unexpected change came down from leadership. A reassignment, minor on paper, significant in implication. It affected my work directly. My first instinct was to wonder what she thought of it. Not my manager, not the data, not my future, her. The thought stopped me cold. I stared at my screen, the words blurring, slightly as something inside me finally refused to cooperate with the illusion I'd been maintaining. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't professionalism. This wasn't even temptation. This was internal alignment with an external influence. And that realization carried weight. I took a walk during lunch, longer than necessary. The city noise felt distant, muffled, like my mind was wrapped in cotton. I replayed every moment, every look, every pause, every word that hadn't been said. None of it crossed a line. That was the problem. The boundary was intact. I wasn't. For the first time, I asked myself a question I'd been carefully avoiding. If nothing else ever happens, will I still be changed by this? The answer was immediate. Yes, because I already was. That afternoon, we crossed paths again. Briefly. Unintentionally unavoidable. A shared corridor. A moment where stopping would have been obvious. We didn't stop. She walked past me as if nothing had ever existed between us. And yet her expression held something new. Not distance, resolution. That expression stayed with me long after the hallway was empty. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't invitation. It was finality. She had already made her decision. I realized then that whatever this had been, whatever it was becoming, it had reached a conclusion on her terms. And that left me with only one responsibility: to face what I had allowed myself to become without ever being asked. That night, I sat alone with that truth longer than I wanted to. No distractions, no rationalizations, just honesty. I hadn't been manipulated. I hadn't been misled. I had participated, quietly, willingly, in something that fed a part of me I hadn't known was hungry. Attention without demand, influence without force, permission without words. The danger wasn't her power, it was my readiness. That was the hardest thing to accept, because it meant the next choice was mine alone, and there would be no one else to blame for it. The next morning felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, clearer. Clarity doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives when excuses stop responding. I didn't wake up thinking about her. That alone told me something had shifted. For the first time in weeks, my thoughts weren't scanning for signs or meanings. They were still. And stillness, I learned, is not emptiness. It's alignment. At work, everything continued as usual. Emails, meetings, deadlines, systems that didn't care about inner conflict. I found comfort in that. Structure had always been honest with me. It asked for effort and returned results. No ambiguity. I passed her once that day. No pause. No tension. No charged silence. Just two professionals moving through the same space. She didn't look at me. And for the first time, I didn't want her to. That was the moment I knew the decision had already been made. Not out of fear. Not out of morality. But out of self-recognition. I had crossed no visible boundary. The world would never know there had been anything to question. But I would have known, and that was enough. The truth is, control isn't proven by what you resist once. It's proven by what you refuse to continue. Later that evening, I stayed behind after most of the office had emptied. Not to wait, not to hope, but to close something quietly. I sent a formal request for reassignment. Neutral language, professional reasoning, no emotion in the words. When I hit send, I didn't feel relief. I felt responsibility. That's heavier, but it lasts longer. Weeks passed. The distance became real this time. Structural, permanent, not symbolic. I heard about her occasionally, through corporate updates, promotions, strategy shifts, leadership movements. None of it touched me, and that surprised me more than anything else. Because what I had mistaken for connection was never about her. It was about what she represented during a moment when I had let myself drift. She had been a mirror, not a destination. One night, months later, I stood in the same apartment window where I'd once questioned who I was becoming. The city lights looked the same. I didn't. I understood then that the most dangerous moments in life aren't the ones where temptation screams. They're the ones where it whispers, calmly, and waits for you to answer. I had answered once, silently, and then I had corrected myself, deliberately. That correction didn't make me a hero. It made me honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the only ending that doesn't follow you like unfinished business. Some stories don't end with confrontation. They end with withdrawal. And sometimes walking away without being noticed is the strongest proof that you finally noticed yourself.